describe that in a minute, but I really want to welcome everyone and express my own personal excitement at the turnout here today. This is our third monthly breakfast seminar. Of course, this is lunch because the School of Cinematic Arts is now it's wonderful.
Not up at 7 in the morning.
Yeah, you know, just don't get up that early. Yeah, that's right. So, but it's very exciting. It's also our first event here at UPC at the University Park campus, and I think that speaks really to the vision of those of us who have been moving the integrative health effort forward. It really is a big vision that is inclusive of multiple schools across campus, at both campuses and also the satellite campuses. Anybody that has an interest in health and healing, we're seeking really to build collaborative relationships. We got our initial funding just a couple months ago from Randy Hall's office at the Provost's Office for Research to sponsor this talk, among other activities, which is really designed through this Research Collaborative Fund to really build a collaborative community of researchers at USC across multiple, again, schools, disciplines, etc., so that we can really meet, network, start to learn what each other are doing, and really start to put together some really solid research in the field of integrative health and medicine. So that's what this is all about. So thanks for being here. And I'll introduce the speakers in a moment, but what I'd like to do first, because we have just such a diverse group, and we did this with the last talk, and it's really so interesting, is just to see who's here. Now, we have a lot of people, so we'll be very brief, but I do want to go around the room and just have everyone just say your name and your division or school where you're from, and that's really about it. It's really, I think, will be eye-opening to see who's here and who's interested in really bringing these integrative healing things to USC. Because I think we're kind of behind the main wave, but we're catching up fast. So I think I'll start over here, and we'll kind of go around this way. Outer circle first, inner circle next.
Okay, Scott Fisher, Associate Dean of Research here at the School of Cinematic Arts. And what?
Interactive Division.
Interactive Media Division.
Marian Negotzes, Interactive Media Division, Cinema School.
Harry Overman, Interactive Media Division, Cinema School.
Linda Meyer, Department of OBGYN.
Bruce Green, Clinical Psychiatry.
Sam Harris, the university psychiatrist.
Claudia Wojcicki, student health physician, and also Children's Hospital obesity and diabetes work group.
Dimitri Ballard, Pivotal Biosciences, and licensee from USC.
Nick Vidar, I'm a second-year medical student at Kent.
Amanda Bainey, I'm a staff member here in Wellness and Health Promotion on main campus.
Lauren Cook, I'm a doctoral student in biomedicine.
Gary San Angel, MSc CTSI.
Gail Lemons, SC CTSI.
Jim Garbonati, MPH program.
Nancy Berman, RN Navigator for the Lung Program on Health Science campus.
Jeff Upperman, Director of Trauma at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles.
Brian Wu, PhD student.
Andrew Socker, a graduate of the SCA IMD department.
Yasan Hashemian, graduate student of Interactive Media Division of the School of Cinema.
Michael Lin, graduate student in Interactive Media Division.
Andrew Goldstein, graduate student in Interactive Media Division.
Stephen Barnes, master's student of biochemistry.
Henry Spooky, Department of Psychiatry, medical behaviorologist.
Ashley Hall, Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy.
Scott Orr, Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy.
Ellen Rudolph, founder of an integrative oncology center in San Fernando Valley.
Zachary Bain, Computer Science undergrad at USC.
My name is Jeffrey Gold, Director of Pediatric Pain Management Clinic at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, and I'm in the departments of pediatrics and anesthesiology at Keck School of Medicine.
Sarah Bedron, pediatric interventional cardiology at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, associate professor at USC School of Medicine.
Mary Alto, patient advocate at USC Morris.
Mike Saito, non-professional chair at IGN Art Gallery. Yes, Chief Genetic Medicine.
Mary Sue, I'm here in support of
Pappy, School of Medicine at the Norris Cancer Center.
Friday Bacchus, I'm getting undergraduate student in social work and business in the Global Society.
Harry Every, I'm a programmer, media producer, and technical director developing theme parks and attractions, Magic Castle, and Transverse Media with USC IGM. Yogi McCarter, Psychology and Physical Therapy.
Lynn Crandall, Institute for Genetic Medicine Art Gallery.
Amol Simpanga, USC Institute for Genetic Medicine, in charge of young professionals.
Mother Dariana, working development for USC Norris Cancer Center.
Jim Burklow, Associate Dean of Religious Life for Colorado Cancer.
Suanna Lee, a global health student here at USC and co-director for Hydro College program.
Lynn Zeichner, I do yoga therapeutics.
Jody Curlin, physical therapist, inpatient rehab at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles.
Jackie Maury, I'm a research scientist from the Institute of Creative Technologies at USC.
Postdoctoral research associate at the same institute in medical literature analytics.
Francis Steeper, pediatric.
Joe Mayer, I'm a professor here at the School of Cinematic Arts, and in the production division, I also teach in the Annenberg School for Communication.
Quite a diverse crowd. Very excited. I'd also like to introduce in the back of the room Cecilia Avila. You all get emails from her. Without whom we would not be eating. If any of you go to theater, there's always an announcement at the beginning. Please take your candy out of the cellophane wrapper now so that you don't disturb the actors. So I'll say that now. If your food's still in the paper bag, take it out as you're taking it out and not interrupting our speakers. But otherwise enjoy. So very exciting. Good to have everybody here. So I'd like to introduce my Scott Fisher, who is the, well, you can say your official title, but as I understand, the research team for the School of Cinematic Arts. And he's going to introduce us really to that concept of research in cinema.
Great, thanks, Mark. So welcome everybody, and thanks for making the trek all the way over here from other parts of campus. I was going to go through some quick slides to give you an overview of the kind of research we do in the School of Cinematic Arts, and hopefully there may be some interest or might trigger some things that you're working on that we could collaborate on. We do a lot of collaborations. I'll talk about some of them. And then I'll introduce Mary Tina, who's going to give a much more interesting presentation. So let me start with kind of what it means to do research in cinema. This is kind of a fairly new thing for us. I mean, the school's known for feature films, Academy Award-winning graduates, et cetera, here in the city of Los Angeles and Hollywood. But in terms of our research effort, the idea is really to think about new forms of entertainment and education, of course, because that tends to scale very well. We work with many schools across campus. We work with ICT as well, that Jackie is from. We tend to be brought in for game design applications, for human-machine interface, interactive design kinds of applications as well. And I'll show some examples of those. We work with a lot of different industry partners. You'll see some examples up here. This is actually a slide I stole from Mary and Tina. Again, thinking about typical entertainment experiences, you might think about out-of-home experiences like going to the movie theater. But just in the last decade or so, we're seeing all kinds of new technologies enabling new kinds of experiences. Games, immersive environments, mobile media, networked online social stuff. For us, this turns into these kind of descriptors, like social narrative, persistent, ambient, persuasive, blah, blah, blah. I mean, again, the user experience, what you do with this stuff is what's most important to us and the kinds of things our research addresses. We have a number of ORUs in the school, everything from the Entertainment Technology Center that works with the studios here in town to help them understand new disruptive technologies coming up. Institute for Multimedia Literacy, what does literacy mean in the 21st century? Games Institute, Mary Tina's group she'll talk more about. We have a number of research labs that tend to be clustered around specific faculty or groups of faculty, and I'll show some examples of those. So first off, engagement and immersion. I mean, for entertainment, of course, that's critical. Like, how do you keep people in their seats watching this stuff, engaging with the media? Our approach to this, again, we make feature films. Our students learn how to do that. But we're looking at new kinds of platforms for this. Everything from panoramic cinema, head-mounted displays, augmented reality, and this is kind of a new low-cost VR system that Professor Hogerman has developed. We also do a lot of work in stereoscopic display. You probably noticed a lot of 3D movies coming out recently, a lot more in the works, slowly moving into the home. So we actually have several classes in actually teaching 3D game development, 3D production, and 3D animation. Again, in training, in education, we're starting to see that become an important new tool. We're also looking at changes in kind of the traditional cinema technology itself. So what's interesting about that is that the studios are starting to look at how to get the audience most, give them the most visceral experience possible. Some producers, directors are literally wiring them up with sensors to figure out like what frame rates kind of generate the highest maybe heart rate or GSR response, stuff like that. So the industry's definitely going in that direction. We're looking now, normally at films you see in a traditional theater at 24 frames a second. We're now looking at 120 frames a second. Much higher brightness, surround sound, things like that. So that's, I don't know if that fits into the kind of stuff you're doing, but that's kind of a major issue for us. Game design has been a new program for us just over the last 10 years. We've been surprised at how quickly this kind of took off. We started the Interactive Media Division in 2002. At this point, I think we have something like 8 or 9 student projects that have become commercial game products. We also do a lot of work on what's called serious games for training and simulation. Again, Mariantina will, I think, address some of those. We work again with ICT. We do lots of work with CAT in this area. And it's a pretty unique curriculum in terms of the students learning how to design these experiences with paper prototyping first, and then going on to build digital prototypes. In terms of research, we've got a really wide spectrum of developments in that area. Again, back to this idea of kind of personalized cinema. This is actually something that we didn't do, but I saw in Japan a few years ago, where when you go into this movie theater, your face is actually scanned before you go in. Every person attending the theater goes in and gets scanned. When you sit down and start watching the film, you slowly realize that every single person in the audience is now a character in the film. It wasn't a great film. My character did not do well in that film. I was not happy about that. But it's an interesting indication, I think, of the way this industry is going. And again, there are interesting training applications for that. This idea of neurocinematics is related. Again, we work with some of those departments here on campus to think about, for example, how does the brain fire differently when it's looking at a particular clip in 2D versus the same clip in 3D? And that's kind of an interesting quantitative approach when normally everything we've done has been very much qualitative based. We do work in what we would call distributed scholarship or distributed collaboration. We've been looking at ways to actually have crowdsourced cinema that is basically breaking up the script and letting multiple people respond with short film clips uploaded to YouTube and then harvested together to make a kind of traditional feature-length film. The results are okay. It's actually fun, though, in terms of the process of getting people on these missions to track down how would I shoot this particular piece of this script. One of our newer initiatives is this idea of virtual production. A big change that you'll see in the next decade or so in filmmaking and media making in general is this idea of literally using things like game engines to model the whole film before anything is actually shot. So you may know the term pre-visualization. So sometimes we do short clips to figure out camera angles and things like that using a graphics engine. So what I'm saying is at this point we can now use these cheap game engines to start modeling literally the whole film before even actors are hired. So that's going to have a big impact on the cost of these kind of outrageous big budget films and hopefully on quality. We work with ICT on some of their virtual character development. Jackie can tell you a lot more about these projects. For example, these are virtual docents at the Museum of Science in Boston. They have pretty strong AI behind them that can actually respond to any questions you might ask them, these kids might ask them. I think I won't say more about that. Our faculty are collaborating again at ICT with some of the researchers there on new technology for generating stereoscopic displays. This is a volumetric display for doing stereo. It's literally a spinning mirror so that you can actually walk around this life-size head. So even though I said we focus on the user experience, here's an interesting new technology that we can use for the kinds of experiences we develop. The last couple examples are from our mobile media lab. This is an area we've been involved in for a few years, which is called life logging. So you probably are familiar with this idea of the quantitative self? Quantified self. So literally using things like a Fitbit and many different sensors to track your body performance during the course of a day. We've started working with Microsoft on a project that they had in this area where they developed a camera that would take thousands of pictures a day of kind of every conversation you would have, every meeting, kind of every encounter, record all your conversations. Obvious privacy issues, but it ended up being enabling this ability to develop a kind of personal archive, which interests us. It also has this idea of kind of this first-person viewpoint kind of documentary of your life, right? Normally we see films through a director's viewpoint, so this opens up a whole other area of research. Well, we did work on that for a while, but then it occurred to us that this idea of life logging could apply to other things, like the built environment. So we proceeded to build an iPhone app that was in interface with this very building. We tapped into the 4,000 sensors from the Building Information Management System from this building, and we had the building actually tweeting about all the activities in the building, like the temperature, the air quality, what films are being made in what screening rooms, and stuff like that. We had the building sending out missions to people in the building saying, please take pictures of this kind of event today. So it's a way to crowdsource a kind of archive of stuff happening in the building. And on and on. I mean, so we have a new building opening in a couple of months, and we've worked with the architects from the ground up to make sure that that building is kind of this living character from day one when we start moving into it. So buildings as storytelling characters. BMW found out about this And we've been doing the same with their cars. So they gave us a couple cars. We now have a Mini Countryman named Nigel that we built an iPhone app. It taps into the hundreds and hundreds of sensors in that car. We built an authoring tool so that using that data we can author experiences that you embark upon with your car as the partner. So car as storytelling character. I don't know if you've seen recent press about this. We've been actually working with Leslie Saxon's group, the Body Computing Center, and the next step in this will actually be this kind of health card where we're combining the driver's life logging info with the car's life log, and it turns into this kind of interesting, huge set of data. Anyway, stay tuned for that. Other new areas, I talked about neurocinematics and interactive architecture. We also have a couple of these collaborative research grants. One is in the area of emergent cities with Roski and the School of Architecture. And there's a picture of our new building, which will house our interactive media division, our media arts and practice PhD program, and our Institute for Multimedia Literacy. And for me, the best part of that building is the top floor will be all research labs, which is the first time we've actually had that here in the school. And Mary and Tina's lab, which will focus on interactive media and health applications, is actually right there. Okay, so let me segue a little bit. The one area that I left out was exactly that. It was entertainment applications, specifically for health, of what we do here in cinema. These are some examples of work that Mary and Tina's lab has done. We also have interesting and very important work by Domayer, the School of Cinematic Arts, in this area as well. So Mary and Tina came to us, 8 years ago? 9 years ago.
Best years of my life.
Yeah, so she's kind of one of these amazing people that, you get this resume on your desk, and it's like she's been involved in so many different areas. Really kind of amazing interdisciplinary background of fine arts, film, photography, electronic media at School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Then she did her master's in electronic visualization at the University of Illinois Chicago Electronic Visualization Lab, which, we've worked with, I've worked with those guys for a long time, so to have somebody like that show up and bring that culture into a school like this that, typically does not have that kind of ties into computational media and interactive media was tremendous. It was a huge win for us to be able to get her here. Unfortunately, she got stuck doing kind of a lot of lab management stuff and technology. Lucky for us, not lucky for her. But finally, we moved her to research faculty track, and then she just kind of took off. She's pioneered this whole new field of interactive media and health, and I think I should turn it over to you.
Okay, now we must. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Now I feel really performance pressure. So my slides today are really not slides because I'm trying to do something else, which is actually write down her talks and try to deliver them. And I'm not going to talk too much about projects that I've done except towards the end, because what I figured I would do was more about how I think about the work I do. And there are some familiar faces here that I've worked with for a long time, and they don't even know what motivates me and kind of how I think about things. So I figured this is a good venue for this. So let me practice this. Okay, so let's get this thing woken up fully because it's still asleep. Come on. So the other thing is my computer crashed this week, and I wanted to make sure that if worst case scenario, I could literally read my talk and act it out for you. So how about that? So today I wanted to talk to you about different ways of thinking about interactive entertainment before we can even talk about how to use it for healing. So, because I've been thinking about this for the last 5 to 6 years quite a bit. So some of the perspective I will put out is more philosophical, but I will speak to any scientific evidence where we actually have some. So I hope that I can spark some ideas on how we can build more evidence, because I'm sure this will trigger a lot of discontent and arguments and questions. So I assume that everyone here has interest in building evidence on how to make better, more effective interactive entertainment for healing. So hopefully we can agree and disagree. So now I would like to clarify the perspective a little bit that I have with regard to even healing. So I ascribe philosophically to Epicureanism. So in Epicureanism, happiness is the absence of suffering. Now, if you take that to face value, as it's been criticized for a long time, it can lead to hedonism. However, it's very kind of ahead of its time. Epicurus was a philosopher that died like over 2,000 years ago, like about 2,400 years ago, defined suffering as unnecessary mental and physical pain. Okay, and if you think about it, that's a pretty progressive way to think about suffering, and not everyone may necessarily agree about that right now, but it is pretty contemporary, right? Both combining the mental and the physical suffering. So now, what's also interesting about him, and I have a couple more things in common with him, is that he's Greek, and he suffers from kidney stones, or did. He actually died from it, because a long time ago, no modern medicine, so... But he didn't make it to his mid-80s, which is pretty good if you really think about it. And so no one needed happiness more than this person. He knew suffering, and he was in a lot of pain. And most of the time, he was pretty grumpy. So I think he was really on a search for happiness. So now the study of human experience, and especially of interactive entertainment, involves quite a bit of empirical research, which is something that he was really into also. And really, it involves a lot of research in how to measure and understand the sense and felt experience. And this is very new in terms of evidence in this area. So, and these experiences are very subjective, but they represent a truth according to a person who's actually having that experience. So it may not be a generalizable truth, but whatever a person is reporting is a certain kind of truth. So now, there's no really such thing as a passive experience if our senses are all very active. But interactivity for contemporary purposes, the way that I see it, expects reciprocity. Okay, and that might be reciprocity from a person or a thing or an object. So watching a movie is not necessarily an interactive experience, although it can be very immersive and involves the senses. And we're processing a lot of information, including social information and signaling from the people who are around us while we're watching a movie, if we are in the theater, or the absence of social interaction produces a different experience if we're watching it alone. So even though the study of entertainment is fairly new, we have a little bit of data in this area. So digital notions of interactivity, though, are new. And every time I work with someone, it takes a while for us to kind of discuss, well, what's interactive and what's interesting, because clicking next is interactive, but who cares, right? It's whatever. It's not exactly interactive entertainment, right? So more often than not, I would say that people who are designers for interactive entertainment, they're interested in designing an experience that people feel very strongly about emotionally, that it's meaningful. And then a lot of the scientists and engineers that I work with are focused on building technology to make that happen, and also in measuring that experience and creating replicable and robust experiences. Okay? So I can often imagine how something should work, but I can't necessarily tell you how to do it so that it's scalable. But I hire people for that. So this keeps asleep, which is not good. All right. Step back. So I'm going to push the notion of interactivity they're borrowing from science. So from the field of affective neuroscience, which is one of my favorite areas to read when I'm not doing something else, has this quote in a book that I really love, which is The Healing Power of Emotion. It's edited by Bosha, Solomon, and Siegel. So Jaak Panksepp writes that mental health ultimately means that an individual, through rich emotion-affirming encounters with living, has integrated his or her life in such a way that the emergent self-structures, deeply affective, can steer a satisfying cognitive course through the future emotional jungles of lived lives. That's a very long, deep quote to digest. And every time I read it, it means something different. However, there's one thing that never changes. So the concept of rich emotion-affirming encounters with living, that's what I'm interested in designing. That is really what it's all about. That's what interactive entertainment is for me when I'm using it either for no reason whatsoever but entertainment for entertainment's sake, which I'm not going to place judgment on, or for healing, commissioned through a sponsored project or personal curiosity or something like that. So how do we design rich emotion-affirming encounters? So I don't think that anyone here would disagree that it's desirable to design something that falls under this category, right? So this is a desirable kind of experience. So, but it's not a one-size-fits-all proposition, because what is a rich emotion-affirming encounter for one person is not the same for another. So, and also, if you kind of connected with the Epicurean perspective of removing suffering to get happiness, you can design something that leads to self-indulgence, right? So, to solve this, I kind of borrow from another field, which is interpersonal neurobiology. And there's a bunch of people here that I really love reading. So one concept that I think about contextually in order to design is called the window of affect tolerance. And this has been kind of passed over by many people. So generally speaking, when we're creating interactive experiences, because they're very manipulable, like you can really change what you're doing. And I'm going to get into more practical examples later, so the beginning of my talk is more theoretical. You're talking about creating an experience that kind of stretches your tolerance to either too much arousal or too little arousal. And that's also a very personal thing for each person. But something that is therapeutic and transformative happens at the boundaries of that window of affect tolerance. So that's a very hard thing to do, because you have to really know the person or the population you're working with, all those kinds of things. This is where good formative research comes into, or tailoring or prior data, those kinds of things when we're developing an intervention. So we really talk about designing for optimal arousal zone and then pushing people beyond what they're comfortable to actually transform them for therapy or for education even. I really have that attitude toward education also. So let's replace some words a little bit. So those of you who are coming from a psychoanalytic or therapeutic perspective will probably recognize another quote potentially. So let's replace interactivity with intersubjectivity. So there's a quote from Daniel Stern: "The domain of feelings, thoughts, and knowledge that two or more people share about the nature of their current relationship. And this can be reshaped, it can be entered or exited, enlarged or diminished, made clearer or less clear." So this assumes relationships between people. But we have relationships between things that we actually make. And interactive experiences are things that we have relationships with. There's a third measurable entity there. And it's also manipulable, and it adapts to people. So I think about that quite a bit. So let's agree that in interactive entertainment, the art lies in carefully crafting an experience that enables an emotion-affirming encounter. And the science lies in designing and measuring variables of intersubjectivity between the human and what they interact with, be that a real human, object, or world, or virtual human, object, or world. Okay? So engineering of it, make it happen, make it robust, make it reliable, make it replicable. Okay, so how can we get into some more concrete things? All right. So I promise not to do more text. This is my outline. I think writing this, so this is not normally how I present, so I apologize if this interactive experience is a little abusive to my audience. So, where was this? All right. Okay. So, let's talk about what people have called the poorly controlled faculty of the mind, the imagination. Okay. So, in 1784, the French Royal Commission of Scientists and Physicians, I believe, investigated mesmerism. Now, how many of you here know about mesmer? Okay. Probably should ask, who doesn't know about mesmerism? A few people. Okay. So, Mesmer was a sort of swindler of the time, I should say, although that applies a lot of judgment. But that's how he was treated. He lured people into these events where he applied really nothing but projection and imagination to produce convulsions on people. And they became like these, weird happening/healing events. And clearly he was having an effect on people without touching them. And he was investigated, and this led to a whole bunch of other fields that I'm not super familiar with, but I found reading this really interesting. So I've been reading the science historian Anne Harrington's book called The Cure Within. And so she tracks the sort of split that happened because the imagination was found to be the enemy of rational inquiry. Okay, a chaotic, irrational, and poorly controlled faculty of the mind. Its fancies, especially ones so powerful they could spread across the population. They were a danger to clear thinking because they were not grounded in truth. Scientific methods were thus required not to understand them, but to unmask them for the unruly, dishonest things that they were. Okay? So, unfortunately, in the French court, there was no imaging and no sensors, and there are a lot of things that we thought were weird and unknown. Now we can kind of measure. Not everything, and certainly the imagination is one of the hardest things to quantify. But this was the state. However, the state of things has led to delay in things like having an Institute for Integrative Medicine at USC and snubbing alternative medicine for a really long time, and like that as the other kind of medicine, and a lot of other kind of rifts between art and science. So let's talk about this poor faculty of the mind, the imagination. So this is a dentist chair, okay? So we're all familiar with this experience. Everyone feels differently about it. Now, oftentimes, the dentist's offices have a lot of pictures. You lean back, and someone with a mask is doing a lot of really noisy things, potentially painful in your mouth. And you're supposed to stare at this picture and be distracted. It's better than nothing, right? Better than staring at an empty wall or some sort of HIPAA release authorization or something like that. Right? So people are trying. They're trying to use our imagination to take us somewhere else. Now, you could take it a lot further, but we're really not. We're not even using contemporary technology to kind of improve that experience. From the simple passive thing of just putting a digital frame to customizing that by having people bring their own stuff into the digital frame, because frankly, not all these pictures are relaxing. I mean, this particular one has a window through a lighthouse. I mean, okay, maybe, but I don't feel a personal connection to that particular image. And maybe someone is afraid of like water and lighthouses, they find them creepy, so this is the last thing they want to be looking at. We don't think about that. We also think about imagination might be a one-size-fits-all proposition. So, how can you make this actually much more contemporary? So, we know that pain distraction is really useful and works. We have Dr. Gold here has a lot of experience doing this actually with patients and pediatric patients. So I actually have your name in my talk. I didn't just do that. So a picture is a simple solution. okay, but you can do a lot more. So what kind of stuff you could do? Scott showed a little bit of technology in terms of what's out there in virtual reality. So this outline does not like to be controlled. So I'm going to control it manually. It's yes. Okay. So we have things like getting cheaper virtual reality displays, where you can kind of cut out people from the world, and they're becoming portable, and you can put whatever you want in them. Maybe you just want to put a static picture, maybe you want to put a movie, maybe you want to put a virtual world, maybe you want to put someone's favorite video game. It doesn't matter. You can put whatever you want, but we're not really trying, and we're not thinking about that. And not only that, this is now not just very affordable, it's becoming disposable, and potentially, each person can have their own. You don't have to worry about germs. So Professor Hoberman works in a lot of kind of cheap and easy VR that some of it can be disposable. This is actually made but with foam core. So you kind of cut it and make it yourself. Cheap lenses, and you can slip your phone in it. You can do it with a tablet. So we're close. We can make these things happen, but we're not doing it. So one thing that I have here is that we have actually great pioneers in VR. So we have Professor Hoberman, we have Professor Fisher, we have Skip Rizzo, we have people who have, such as Jeffrey Gold at CHLA uses VR and pain management. And the one thing that he just pointed out, which is for my next slide, my next image, was related to using augmented reality. We don't really think about that. So he pointed out in another talk that Perry and I gave was that some people don't want to be disconnected from the world. Like they want to be able to see, but you want to perhaps distract their processing a little bit. So what you can do with augmented reality, since you have a phone and you get a camera for free, because all phones have a camera, you can superimpose the real and the virtual, so they still feel connected, but you have other stuff for them to see and do. So they're trying to make sense of it. And we're not doing that. And we can. We actually can. And the other thing is that Scott talked a little bit about is sensing and personalizing these experiences of sensing. This is an emerging area. So one of my students last semester made this horror game for her master's thesis, which attempts to customize a level of game through heart rate variability, which is a new emerging area. It's very difficult to actually do, but the students are actually interested in these types of things. It's very novel. So in this particular game, and there's not a lot in the horror genre, you're actually a therapist in the future, which is kind of an odd narrative, but you are trying to unscramble the memories of traumatized patients, and you're going through like these really weird places in the house and outside where there's real things that happen and things that didn't happen, and you have puzzles to solve, and they require a lot of executive function. And so if you are freaked out by what's happening in the level, and your heart rate kind of changes, and it detects stress, the level will actually get harder and harder. And if it gets really hard, it will take you out into a cooling area. So there's one level where there's like blood on the fridge, and there's spilled milk, and if you really get stressed out, the room actually fills out with milk, which is really creepy. And there's also very creepy audio in this. It's very well done from that standpoint. And that's another thing that's really ignored. So audio is like half, if not a lot of the experience in a lot of these things. So even at the dentist office, if I want to bring it back to that example, okay, you can overwhelm people's visual and all kinds of aspects of their, like vestibular system, but if they can hear the thing in your mouth, like, it's a very discontinuous experience. So if you can put headphones while they're doing that, maybe you can truly take over their senses. Some people may not want that, because that could be even more scary, right? They could be even lonelier if they can't even hear, but they can see. So those are things that we haven't really thought about tailoring or testing to produce any sort of generalizable evidence on what could work best on the majority, or how the brain really processes this technology. So at the intersection of science and art, there are these great opportunities to build more evidence on how our brain processes experiences. So let's see. So the next thing I'm going to segue to is the concept of presence. So we've talked about various aspects of the imagination. So presence, one of my favorite topics to talk about. And presence is often described as being there. Now this is a little bit of an inside joke for people who have seen the movie, might be in film. So how many of you have seen this 1979 movie of Being There? Okay, a lot of people. Highly recommended. Maybe I'm biased, but Being There is almost like it's an inside joke because Peter Sellers is this man who is really a savant. He's an idiot savant, and he has all the trappings of a human being, but he's really not there. He's just not connected. And in the end, there's this great scene where he like kind of walks onto water, and that's really virtual reality-like. Okay, and it's also Jesus-like, but I won't go into that. But it's a very bizarre type of experience. But think about presence, not just about the physical trappings of presence, but I want to talk about presence poetically, metaphorically, and all the other stuff. So we talk about presence in all the senses, but also the sense of presence as your memory, your mind, the trails of you being there, your consciousness being there. So even though we're very visual, let's not forget the tactile and the emotional. So think about being there as something very simple, like remember in the old times when you had your analog phone and you would fall asleep next to someone breathing? How many of you have done that with boyfriends or girlfriends? Okay, that's really presence. You can hear someone breathing, you're both there symbolically, a little bit kind of the audio exchange is happening. And audio is a very haptic experience, right? It goes through your ears, it touches you, literally. Audio touches your body, okay? So it's a very strong sense of presence. Because we lose a lot of that through the cell phone because the audio is just not like that. And now this has been replaced through kind of texting or Skyping, like before you fall asleep, right? And now someone's text message on your phone has kind of presence, and you don't think about it until serious stuff happens, like someone dies, or you can no longer talk to them about it. So we've studied presence for a long time, but we haven't explored all aspects of it in therapeutic research. So touch and the emotional and all these other aspects. And also culturally, thinking about things like Facebook. So Scott talked about life logging. Well, your presence now is on Facebook through a trail of your life. And when you disconnect your relationship with someone, let's say it's someone you broke up with, let's say someone who's died, your stuff is out there, right? So our ability to grieve has also been altered through how our presence kind of stays out there, or how it's captured and recorded. So I'd like to talk about thinking about presence in terms of human movement. So Scott showed a slide about motion capture. So human movement in terms of presence is also very symbolic because we recognize biological motion. And so think about capturing the gait of someone and mapping it on something else. So in motion capture, let's move this over here. You capture someone, you extract the skeleton, you map it onto another thing, and potentially another body. So this is not the same person. Not at all. They look much more worked out. And let's see. So, but the skeleton, let's say there's no body. If you know a person really well and you just see their skeleton as they're moving, you can probably recognize them among other skeletons because we remember that, right? Gait, our biological motion has a signature to it, and it's very, very personal. So, if we motion captured that movement and use a lot of technology we have right now, we could actually make duplicates of all of you in practice, and you can visit your patients at home through exactly how you react. Probably a better version of you, because if we've motion captured enough of you, we can catch you on your best days, and you can react more empathically, and we can map your cues on how you react to what people say in a more efficient manner. What happens when you are no longer practicing, or you leave a place, or you die, who uses that copy of you that potentially is a version of yourself? Interesting ethical questions regarding that we haven't really had to deal with, but we will in the future. So also in terms of human movement, if you think about not the application of virtual humans, but humans interacting with each other, human movement, because of our mirror neurons, can also change in response to other people in the room. Okay? So we have a lot of interesting technology to capture how that happens. I'm going to refer you to an interesting book called Honest Signals by Sandy Pentland at, I think he's MIT. Right? So Sandy Pentland has developed this device called a sociometer. So it captures your audio, so your, how you talk, and also your gross movement as a pattern to try to understand things like persuasion and influence in interpersonal relationships. And you can use that to detect whether something is going well, such as a negotiation or a job interview or something in your office, your interaction with your patients. You can use that to be more persuasive for pitching something. So he did a small study where in college students, if you showed them an avatar that mimicked them a little bit, they were more likely to be persuaded for whatever was being pitched at them. How about that? So salespeople know this, right? They look at you, they take you in, and they try to mirror you because we kind of expect that. And it's also, if you think about it, very odd when someone does not mirror you at all. That creates a very disconnected, less interactive experience if you're not getting some of that mirroring. So I've been described as very empathic, which is a problem because when I'm giving talks, I have to be very kind of robotic because I'm trying to process everyone's affect, and there's no way I could possibly respond to every single person in this room. So my sensory system is completely overwhelmed. Like my mirror neurons are just toast right now. So in terms of how we recognize people, one of the examples that I wanted to give, this might be out of order, but going back into the concept of presence, I segue into the mirroring, but aspects of replicating someone can be very subtle. So at ICT, actually, who here has seen Avatar? The movie Avatar? Almost everyone. Okay. So how many of you thought, or did you feel like the actors were highly recognizable, the ones that were mapped to avatars? Okay. So the light reflecting off the actors is captured by this thing called a light stage, which was developed at ICT. And the technology is really amazing because it will project light from like every point of view and create this really detailed light map of you. And you can map it onto like a bottle of water, and that would be you. You know, it's like there's aspects of what we recognize as another person that's familiar that have nothing to do with their emotion, but they're aspects of how we process faces and light, right? Subtle things that we don't have a lot of answers for in neuroscience, okay? But engineers move really, really fast. Like, I can do this, I'll make it. And they don't necessarily know what the effects of it are. So that's pretty cool. Now, to the more sentimental in terms of presence. So I talked a little bit about grieving. So the concept of grieving and presence brings up a lot of interesting questions, especially for those of you who do a lot of therapy or think about reconciling artifacts that people have. So how do we deal with this issue? So we're used to keeping letters and pictures and all that kind of stuff, but letting go now is a multi-sensory experience and it's multimodal. We have a lot of artifacts. So where I'm from, Greece, we keep pictures of the deceased, but we also keep pictures of the graveside, which are a reminder the person is gone. We have them, but they're gone. We have them, but they're gone. It's this really interesting juxtaposition. So we don't forget them, but they're gone. But there are other aspects of their presence that we remove as soon as possible, such as their clothes. So within days or weeks of someone passing away, you take all their stuff and you give it away. Because a person's smell, it's not that clothes hang in the closet, although the habits contribute a lot of memory, but the smell in the house of someone who's very familiar, it's a very difficult thing to deal with. And dealing with that absence is, letting go. So think about all these other aspects of presence, which we don't quite replicate right now, but we have. So I bring an example of how digital has sort of disrupted this. So unfortunately, this is me. I haven't had bangs in a very long time, so this is really funny that I had bangs again. And this is my cousin who was killed in a really terrible accident 3 years ago. So her mother is not able to move on because, as a gesture of kind of goodwill, her boyfriend made all these recordings and videos collections and gave it to her mother, which she interacts with every day, as if the person, has never left. So she cannot grieve because the person is there. And even though there's no reciprocity, she talks to her videos like she's there. So that's kind of odd, but we have this. People will do anything from cyberstalk someone's Facebook page when they break up to just hold on to every artifact of the people who died because they can. So giving away that connectedness is a very difficult thing. We don't really talk about that much. So the concept of being there, very cultural. So native cultures, many of them believe that recordings, whether oral or visual, they trap someone's soul. So that's very poetic for me, but recordings, for me at least, lack the social reciprocity, what I desire, to call something truly interactive. So when I look at pictures of my cousin, I actually put everything away because I know I'll be ready when I can look at them and not feel sad, because it reminds me that there is no reciprocity. The picture is not very comforting because the person is no longer there. So, whereas her mother doesn't believe that they have left, so they have all their stuff around because that presence is just very, very strong for her. So, I'm going to talk about the last concept, which combines with the presence and the imagination, which has to do with somatosensory gratification. So I torture some of my students with this concept. It's a tough one. So, let's see. So, somatic gratification, or somatosensory gratification. You can talk about it different ways. So I define this as the integration of interaction in a way that makes sense to the body, the brain, and the mind. So it relates to presence as presence can enhance it, and relates to the imagination as the imagination likes to fill in the gaps between what doesn't exist. So I bring up a very banal example of somatic gratification, which is buttons. All of us here are familiar with buttons, okay? So the humble button is something that people spend a lot of time designing, simulates an experience that doesn't actually necessarily exist. Like virtual buttons, we shade them so they appear dimensional. We animate them so when you touch them they become depressed to simulate haptic sensation when there isn't any, okay? So we spend things like time to put drop shadows and all this kind of stuff. Or this is before we even talk about what happens when you press the button, okay? Just what does it look like? And yet every one of us experiences a button very differently, depending on what you expect it to do, whether you've seen it before, whether you're familiar with buttons, and whether the previous experience was pleasurable, meaningful, or functional. So, what?
Or expensive.
Or expensive. Good one. So pressing stuff doesn't have to do anything besides maybe making noise or giving haptic feedback to be somatically gratifying. How many of you here love popping bubble wrap? Right? It's a very somatically gratifying experience. If I talked to every single one of you, I would describe it as gratifying for different reasons, but that's what I'm talking about to start. So, it's mindless, but maybe it isn't, because maybe you're existentially wondering why it's so pleasurable. Okay. So, let's talk about this. It brings me to interfaces. So the button is why I talk about interfaces. So, here's the bane of my existence, and most of us, right? The keyboard. This particular kind of keyboard. So the interfaces that we use to interact with our technology in order to deploy them, they provide very complex somatic interactions with varying degrees of somatic gratification. So all of us use this kind of thing, sadly. It's the most intergenerational device within this room. And it's unnatural, but when you learn to use it, you can type at very amazing speed. So we've moved this interface now to touchscreens, which is very odd because for me, the experience of using accordion on the screen is torture. Okay, so I don't have the same haptic experience. You don't press a button and it comes back like your regular keyboard. The vibration is startling when people have that because it's like, the whole thing is vibrating. It's not like a key. Okay, so it's very odd. It's discontinuous. Maybe for someone who doesn't have an experience of a real curdy, okay, it's natural, but this is very odd to me. So I have resorted to another handicap device, which is the QWERTY for my cell phone, okay, so that I can still write 80 words per, well, maybe like 40, okay. And neither of these things are actually healthy for me, but here I am, so using it. And my handwriting has become terrible because of using this stuff. So we don't really think about the impact of all these devices we're creating and using, and then we're just migrating content without thinking of the device. And so most of the work in the research lab that I work with is trying to avoid dealing with unnatural devices. So we try to work with other kinds of devices. Because the thing that I hate the most, unfortunately, is the game controllers. Okay? So I've never liked them, and I stopped playing games as they became more complicated. And there's nothing about them that I ever found gratifying, but the students find them, they're familiar, right? So they still use them. So I think from a physiological perspective, it's the worst possible thing to impose on people. And that's opinion, but hey, if you ask a lot of people who do ergonomic research or physiology or everything else, they'll probably tell you the same thing. So let's think about the human body as a device, okay? So we are a superb device. We're a superb controller. So we're multimodal. We have a lot of different kinds of inputs and outputs, and we can adapt to others because of our mirroring system and other reasons. And our mind, though, is very complex because it emerges from an accumulation of experiences that have been received through our body and processed through our brain. So this is why we make these third-party interfaces so that we have kind of a common new thing to all start with. And unfortunately, these have neutralized our minds. Most of the time they do. So we disassociate our minds from a lot of experience that can be a lot more immersive because we're dealing with unnatural interfaces. So even if you think about writing, you at least would run out of ink, or you have to sharpen your pencil and you get up and do that and interrupt that experience. We have infinite ink. You can sit on your computer for 6 hours, 8 hours and write. Nothing will stop you. And that's a pretty unhealthy relationship with our technology. So also they don't promote any inner mindfulness because running out of ink also kind of teaches you about planning and resources and things like that. We have never-ending writing capacities. And then our mirroring skills can also atrophy if we're just completely, attached to what we're doing through these devices and not interacting with people in other ways. So I'm going to let go of some of this pessimism and I'll talk about something more optimistic, which is the only piece of my work I'll talk about here, which is this project called Skyfair. God, it's a computer. It's a miracle it's alive right now, so I shouldn't yell at it. If you're good, it's okay. So of all the projects I've worked on, this particular project, which I'll talk about, has been the one we talk about somatic certification the most. So we're adapting exercise, shoulder exercise, for individuals with spinal cord injury. And we're using a whole set of stuff. Some of it is old, some of it is new, but it doesn't really matter at the moment what it is, as long as it feels right and gives the data we actually need, because this is a prototype. So upper shoulder exercise, actually all of us could use this, especially if you've been using a computer for a very long time, right? So this is something that we've had to, essentially, we're using the Kinect camera, which tracks movement, but really gross motor movement at the moment. It's really very bad for certain other things. And then a custom metal rig for parking the wheelchair and the resistance bands. We've picked apart this really cheap old technology which has a multi-directional joystick, so it knows which direction you're going, plus you can pull it out. It's from an old golfing game from '95, very odd. And standard wheelchair. And what we're trying to do is break down every single movement to its essence. So you have things like external rotation, you have rowing, you have diagonal pull, and you have lifts. And there's some stretching before that, and God forbid people remember to breathe while they're doing their exercises. All these things that are actually not in your exercise papers that you get from the doctor. So we're trying to ascribe new meaning to movements. So one of the things that I learned from doing a lot of dance and Pilates rehabilitation on myself, which is pretty broken, is that you need something, either pain or touch by the other person, something to actually close the feedback loop and make the experience of exercising somatically gratifying, at least for rehab. So once you get digital, things change. You don't have the same type of thing. You're not working side by side with the person to show you something or touch you, or maybe you're no longer in pain, so you don't have that feedback of what you're doing. And maybe you don't even have a mirror. How many of us even have a mirror in the doctor's office when we do PT? So mirror is really important when you're learning how to move. So when I had to learn to re-engage my lower abdominal muscles, my teacher would sit by me and do guided meditation. So she would put her hand on my belly and would ask me to imagine sand falling from her hand through my belly button to the floor while I was breathing. And that was over time. I know it sounds weird, but you have to try it. So that's how I learned to engage those muscles. For me, they were inaccessible. They just were not there. So over time, I built that ability. So now we're trying to do a lot of other very crazy imaginary things, like external rotation is the most boring exercise in the world. All these exercises are really boring. They're unnatural. We're not doing them day to day for anything. So they're artificial. So in this particular game, we may be asking people to collect water in a bucket without spilling, or row their boat out of a canal, or fly into the sky through the sun and the moon to make their mark on the ground. A lot of concrete things, abstract things, crazy things. We've made probably about 35 prototypes at this point, just to understand what could be somatically gratifying to people, so that exercise experience could be done correctly, but also give appropriate feedback. Because the type of feedback you get with digital influences the quality of your movement. Remember, we can change that intersubjectivity between what we're doing. So I hope some of this sparks your imagination, and we're hoping that exercise can slowly become mesmerizing, and that the physicians and scientists we work with can tell us why that is actually for real. And then people will not convulse while we're doing this. And the reason is because we're going to try to treat their bodies and their imagination with respect, and not as a poor faculty of the mind. So this is my talk, and thank you very much.
I think we've gone over a little. I don't know, Mary Jane, can you stay for a while?
Yeah, I can stay.
If anybody can stay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So we want to open it up for both questions, and also what we try to do at these symposia is actually generate some discussion. I mean, what does this bring up for people in terms of, potential ways to see their own field differently, and how, this might have sparked their own thoughts about new potential research projects, collaborations, or whatever, So we'll open it up, and I guess if anyone wants to ask any questions, we'll start with that.
I'll show my last slide, which is we're actually measuring how people are performing these movements through EMG, because again, you're incentivizing and showing them how to do it, so how they're doing it is completely effective of what you're giving them to see and do, and how you're rewarding them. So, and right now, EMG it's a measurable, visible thing. In the 18th century, So, questions? Yes.
Cognitive behavioral therapy. Our goal is to get people to change behavior, not so much psychoanalytic. Is there anything in what you do that can help people imagine their goal, which often is a problem with depression? They don't have the vocabulary. And some of it is somatic in that they've had something very serious. So now I want them to suddenly imagine themselves getting from point A to point B when they're half dead. And of course, there's many examples of cancer cases, for instance, where people recover in most amazing ways. Is there anything, way to use, I'm sure there is, but how would you use this technology to get people to form goals after a major catastrophic illness or whatever? Because we see it a lot in both children and adults, and they may or may not have disabilities associated with it. If we can get them to get goal-directed behavior, we start to get this going.
So how would you do that? So right now, how do you do it in CBT? How do you do it? How do you help them
I'm not a
imagine?
psychiatrist.
Ah, okay.
I know that I like the technique because it's more immediate and years of trying to figure out where it all started.
Sure. But CBT is good for short-term therapy.
Right.
Right? Only, so.
I know there are psychiatrists
There's people
who
here who are,
probably help me.
yes.
So I'm integrated.
Okay. So, does someone who has expertise in this want to pitch in?
I'll throw something in. I'm not a psychiatrist in any way. I can tell you that from a video game standpoint, we've been doing it for years in the cutscenes you see at the end of video games. I mean, from the earliest Pac-Man days, where you used to see the little Pac-Man run around, and he would, and while you're watching him before you got the recorder, you're seeing him accomplish things that might take a real human being weeks or months of
It's
gameplay
talking about
to do.
modeling, right?
But in a sense, you're seeing it do it, and then that gives you the inspiration to drop that quarter and say, yeah, I'm going to keep doing it until I can do it.
Yeah. I mean, we're dealing with people in wheelchairs and we make them fly and swim, and they might not be doing that actually, but they're doing it through the game. And God forbid they're inspired to do that afterwards. Yes.
I have a question, but first an announcement. Because people might start trickling out, Jeffrey reminded me, I just want to announce that next month's Integrative Health Symposium will be a breakfast symposium at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. Do you remember the date?
February 6th.
Wednesday, February 6th.
Wednesday, February 6th at the Saban Research Institute at 7:30 in the morning for breakfast and an 8 o'clock presentation by Dr. Wu. And the question is, I was really interested in the comment about the picture of the lighthouse and how that might disturb the dental patient. And my thinking went to, I use in my research with obese kids interactive guided imaging. So it's basically a facilitated meditation. Why it's called interactive is because rather than implanting an external image like a stress reduction, rather than saying, now you're at a beach and feel the wind, just like you said, if this is a kid who had a knee drowning episode when he was 3, that might actually be traumatic. But instead it invites images from their own imagination. So I guess my bias, having been trained in using that healing modality, when I think about technology and images coming from the outside almost and being external to the person, or even planting images versus those that can be endogenously brought up. And I was speaking to Jackie before the event about is interactive, is technology at a point where you can say, have somebody generate an image from within that has much more salience for them than, say, something that would be explanted.
You can ask them to
and
make
then
something.
turn that into an external image that then they can work on.
Like a very simple thing I can think of is, asking someone to like rebuild an environment, right? You can give them stuff to actually rebuild their room, and then, or in our therapy, you have a practice of drawing stuff, anything from like a mandala to just whatever comes to mind, and then reflecting on that. Technology provides a lot of ability to draw in engaging ways, so you can make things and discuss them. But if you don't want to work with the abstract, you can give them concrete things to actually build and arrange and kind of talk about what that means. So we certainly have the capacity to do that. So I'm really bad at herding questions. So who was, I think you were next.
To return to the first question, behavior therapy has a rich literature with very systematic principles spelled out, not only in terms of the science but technology, where there is, I don't know why you say it's a short-term intervention. People can achieve far-fetched goals as long as you know exactly what you're doing in terms of a calculus, a behavioral calculus, if you will, very small steps with tremendous reinforcement, because frankly, I mean, the flying wheelchair is obviously a fiction.
Sure.
And whether I'm using a wheelchair or not, you can't fool me. However, seeing that a muscle potential is increasing by a small amount, or a flexion is increasing by a fraction of a degree, is tremendously rewarding.
Absolutely.
And you can get, this is the lever that Galileo and Newton spoke about in moving the earth. We have it. And we don't have to go to the imagery when we have the concrete. It perhaps is a little boring. Yes, science can be very boring. Who cares about the pH of the, whatever?
So that's valuable, that feedback can be valuable to you, but some people want their feedback in a more symbolic or other ways, which is why when we're thinking about how you discuss people, their achievement in games, you can give them swag, and people would maybe call that extrinsic motivation, but you can also tell them that they're doing really well, or they can compare with other people's, or there's ways to demonstrate that they're making progress. In other words, you can collect all the data you want, but giving that data back to the patient around may not always be motivation. And just back on my comment on CPT, I think in terms of length, the 12 to 20 sessions that your health insurance covers versus doing psychoanalysis for 3 years that's the length difference I'm talking about.
Don't talk to me about reality of the insurance.
The imagination talk is over. Yes.
I think if you understand sort of the biofeedback technologies and the gaming that go into that, and the same thing with the neurofeedback technologies and the gaming that goes along with that, especially for children, they can actually, increase heart rate variability, decrease heart rate variability as a function of that change. The penguins fly, the elephants stand, there is a feedback loop that to pediatric population is much more engaging and interesting and motivating. But they're still getting the feedback that, hey, you're controlling your heart rate variability right now, and because of that now you're earning these, et cetera, extrinsic rewards. So in the gaming world or in the computerized world, the graphic world, the VR, university, et cetera, this is where the rubber hits the road. That when you can interface something that's medically oriented with behavior and cognitive and gaming, that's where it really becomes significant. And the notion of customizability, right? If I had an 8-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl who's coming in for a painful procedure, they're not going to be excited about that same game per se. And so you want to be able to, on a menu-driven basis, let them select a game that seems intrinsically important for them. And you just can't do one size fits all. So that's, again, where the flexibility of gaming like environments becomes really important.
And again, you have the data. You can keep it in terms of the progress.
Right.
Because you're measuring it all the time.
Absolutely.
But how you represent that involves designing an experience. Yes. I'm sorry, you had raised your hand.
She was first.
Okay.
I really enjoyed your talk, and this is the first time I've been to these meetings, so I'm so happy that I found out about it. Pediatric interventional cardiology. So I was thinking about my patients naively, and they come in for they know it's going to be a painful procedure. My parents kind of know that it's not really painful because they don't have general anesthesia, but to them it's all just felt very scary. And I'm just curious about that idea of the guys who got scanned coming into the movie theater and then we're in the meeting. Like, is there a way to have them be in their tour? Sort of like they're having a tour of the hospital, what's going to happen, and they can see the cells walking around and talking to the nurses. That's so much less stressful for them than having a tour.
It's a great idea, that pre-flighting an experience, which we call it probably visualizing it. It creates a lot of comfort because imagination is also very scary, right? We imagine things that are maybe not going to happen, right? So a little reality could be brought in through imaginative media. Yes?
In terms of what's actually happening here in Los Angeles, it's kind of media in a hospital setting, the only place I'm aware of is the Roy and Disney Cancer Center in St. Joe's in Burbank. I don't know really what they do or how they're doing it, but I wondered if you could speak to that and who's involved with it.
I'm not familiar. I don't know if anyone else here does know the program. Do you know about their program at all? No.
They have these ambient rooms that are, the environment can be set in many ways. It's really not much more than sound, color, and they use these rooms for different treatments. So I think it's a matter of simply controlling the environment of the room. So it's color.
Music maybe, but it's
I think you could take it much further, certainly. And in Pasadena, I think the radiation oncologists have a radiation room which is generally in a basement, right, because of the radiation, but they have projected clouds, and you can actually program what environment you are seeing while you're there.
But that's all that.
And what hasn't been done about all of this, because a lot of centers are doing this, is to, you were saying, get feedback, measure what it's doing to the patient. Is it really making the experience better for the patient?
And that can be pretty simple to measure, at least self-reports.
Right. And it's one thing just to feel better while you're there, but someone else had mentioned about behavior change, which is, whether it's post-op care, whether it's being aware of signs that we want you to, for chemotherapy, whether it's an activity regimen, is something to not only reinforce and monitor. I think this is where, these types of stimuli can help. I think what you were showing about people in wheelchairs with getting feedback about their emotions and movement in real time is really fascinating. We need to explore that.
I mean, I know that with some of the VR-based studies we did at Children's, that it completely changed the experience for the children and the healthcare professionals. So phlebotomists who used to draw blood on a kid who's typically crying, screaming, anxious, and stressed, who's now video gaming and is calm. It takes a stick and not 5 sticks to try to draw the blood. And so everybody's happy. And we have all those metrics both on the environment, the healthcare provider, and the patient. So we have good evidence to demonstrate that is efficacious for the kids and the healthcare provider. So it's clearly is an intervention that can have a lot of weight.
It's something we've used mostly with kids because we have that bias that games are for kids, but really we can use it for everyone. But you have to carefully curate the experience and choose what it is that we're going to do in the patient. We have a lot of content off the shelf, but we don't engage with it to know how we can use it. Yes?
I run a gaming company that specializes in cognitive training for adults, specifically memory and focus. And I'm curious just to hear about your other projects that you have going on within the next year or two, particularly if it involves any cognitive aspect.
Yes, and yes. And it would probably take a bit to do that. So we can talk about it after.
That sounds good.
So I've tried to do something different. So normally I go and talk about all my projects, and I can certainly do that another time. But yeah, I didn't want to take too much time with that except for one project. That was more sensory oriented. Yes?
So the comment about the using gaming to help motivate movement, I think makes sense. So I'm a physical therapist, but one of the problems with motor control is that we want the movement to be foreign.
To be what?
To be foreign.
Foreign.
To not be a natural movement, because we want to break down we want to create a new pathway, a motor plan to change the movement. Also mechanically, often if you take an entire movement, like swinging the backhand for a tennis racket, for example, that has multiple degrees of freedom. There's lots of features to that, and it's multi-segmental, multi-level. So if we can break that into a very isolated movement, it is boring, but it lets someone focus on a particular movement. And I think once you progress to a point where you've got all the pieces and it's ready to put it together, then I think motivationally those things are very effective of the virtual reality a little bit.
Well, why does it have to be boring? I mean, could it be...
No, I'm not saying it has to be boring, right?
I mean, you could come up with an interactive experience where you actually do break it down.
Sure, that would be the piece I think
make it more fun.
We actually have a story attached to this whole project, but we haven't pieced it together. So you have to do 3 sets of these reps, and you have a vessel that you're preparing. So in preparing it, you collect liquid, light your beacon, row out of a channel, fly up into the sky. You kind of do this other exercise to go into the sun, and you're collecting stuff along the way, like your power-ups, like your material. And then you have to do it again, go into the moon, and then like at nighttime. So you do it at daytime, you do it at nighttime, and then in the end, you end up actually making your mark freehand because people don't even take their breaks between exercises, which we can actually reward them for doing here. And you can draw. And so your achievement is also measured by how much stuff you collected because we know how you're doing the movement. And the movement can be you can have it be exact all the time if you want, or you can do it more heuristically where you profile people and know their envelopes of movement and sort of reward them for keeping within that or for getting out of that, especially if you're dealing with stroke, right? So how you design it depends on the purposes of your PT. So stroke versus resistance training, very different beasts in terms of design. But the aspects of the experience can be wildly creative, but how everything is collected and converted into feedback has to be done by breaking down the required movement into very small pieces, what a choreographer would call movement phrases. So we use that kind of approach to deal with movement. Because we find that how PTs teach movement is really not working for a lot of people. It takes a very certain kind of PT to do that, and you assume that you're there all the time, or that people will be compliant, which you know they're not. So, dancers become very autonomous because they practice in front of the mirror with other people. Then they don't look at the mirror, they're looking at their peers, they're looking at the teacher, and you eventually get to a stage where you're alone and you're reversed. You have an audience in front of you, and you've developed the ability to imagine yourself in third person in space. And that takes a very long time. So in physical therapy, we don't really think about that. But with VR, we can make people develop that ability to imagine themselves moving in third person perspective, slowly, which will help them actually do the movement more effectively. So that's the hope at least. Any other questions? Yes?
I just have in the realm of collaboration, building collaborations, you've been over to the health science campus a lot.
I'm there every week.
Participated with a lot. And how do you see the bridges and the connections? I mean, how do you see us building, through your experience, what are the resources here at School for Cinematic Arts? How do we connect them to, healthcare providers that might want to be involved? I don't know, just brainstorm.
So deadlines help people. So most of my collaborations have come about through writing a proposal for something, and usually we never get funded the first time because no one speaks each other's language. Learning other people's process, so my approach is very participatory. I'm not afraid of medical settings, I'm afraid of acquiring myself. So, I like to know who the patient is, what the room is, what the experience of the doctor is, what is the goal, a lot of formative research. And then I need the people to come to my lab, experience the work that we do, understand how we design stuff. But those things take a very long time. I still have colleagues I work with for a long time that don't actually we've not had enough time for them to understand other parts of my research. And we sit in each other's talking like, oh, you do that? And it's surprising. So focus things, like actually making something, whether that is a proposal or making a project, that's how it happens. Unfortunately, we are all very goal-oriented. And physicians are very busy people. They're scheduled to be in the 11th hour of the day. So that, I think, really works. And also exchanging spaces, like taking time to go there and coming back. So it's great that you're here now. Not always meeting at 7 in the morning, or at least using a lot of Google Video to bring people in for stuff. So we do a lot of collaborations virtually because, these projects require a lot of different kinds of expertise, and you can't expect 15 people to cart themselves over to like a pen route, at 9 in the morning or wherever. So we have the knowledge to do really great collaboration over video, and there's a different kind of interaction that you do with it, but it's still pretty powerful. And for some things you do in person. But really what you need is to be passionate about what you care about, so that you can transmit that to the other person and make them care. And meet them halfway. I mean, I have a curiosity for medical stuff, but not everyone does, and people find it scary. So you can't hand someone who lives in this building an article from Nature Neuroscience and expect that they're going to be like, yeah, this is great. Okay? So you're going to have to translate that to something else, and it takes a while to know how to do that. So that's why I find that people at Integrative are good at sitting in the middle, because we're always subject agnostic. We work with a lot of people from different kinds of fields, and we have to make up an interface before we make like the interface that we're making, just to communicate. And just understand like what is your story and what are you trying to tell. So that's my advice.
Well, and just like how your faculty doesn't routinely read Nature and Science, our faculty thinks of it as a game.
Correct.
And they don't understand sort of the neurodevelopmental aspects that go into it, or the cognitive aspects, the behavioral aspects, etc. So that language needs to be translated over as well. So it's not just, oh, it's a game. Because that's really how it translates.
And the discourse still, if you saw the announcement like this week about guns and violence, research being put into studying, media. So this building is scared of being studied. Okay, like this field has been accused of creating all the ills of the world, and that's very problematic for people who are artists and they want to express themselves creatively. And then something could be used like in other ways, or I don't want to enter that discussion, but basically there's a lot of bias toward that. It's changing, but really this field is sort of set back in that direction. Just on that aspect, in terms of focusing on just media violence. It's only like a very small part of the problem. I mean, how about focusing on mental health in America and how to support that? I mean, isn't this what this center is about?
Yes.
Any other questions? Yes.
Just, I feel compelled to throw it on that note that back in the early days of Atari, Nolan Bushnell actually commissioned a number of scientific studies on the effects of their games, which of course were not as nowhere near as graphic as ours are today, but certainly involved the same violent concepts. And they actually discovered, and actually have evidence of the fact that the games actually, the kids who played those violent games were actually less likely to go outside and get in a fight and express their violence other ways.
So it depends
So
on
there
those.
is evidence.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a given that if you did the study, we'd find out necessarily that the media is hurting.
But also, the entire spectrum of human emotion needs to be elicited in exercise. Like if you can think about the affect tolerance model. So there are times when we need to elicit these things, and there's very few therapists that I know that actually use really violent stuff to try to deal with anger with their patients. There's Attila Saranoglu at Mass General, I believe. He does adolescent psychiatry. He uses almost an art therapy approach where he takes all these things off the shelf and he uses it as a platform for discussion and dialogue, and it's very powerful. But we just kind of project all this negative stuff on things instead of looking at it like a tool. This is something we can use. How do we use it? How is it effective? How is it not effective? Any other questions? Yes.
Nolan Bushnell is actually my business partner.
Okay.
And what's interesting is he's very against violent games. He's never made a game that shoots at a person. It's always an alien or something. But what's interesting about it is the shooter games and the violent video games actually make surgeons more precise. And it really comes down to who are you training. If I train this whole room, you guys aren't going to become serial killers. But if I can only study the people who are a little unstable to begin with, and that's why the studies don't show that there's a violent tendency, is because they're studying everybody. And if only 1 or 2% are moving, then it looks safe. But if you could isolate that 1 or 2% and only study them, you could see how much it actually affects them in a big way. So
I'm going to throw something like on the creative side of that, which is, so we have a researcher here who actually has grandmothers playing violent video games, to kind of increase help their executive function. And so there's something wrong in the world, and it's producing really good results, but you have a captive audience. Okay? Older people are very compliant. The fact that we're not making another kind of experience for seniors, whoever they're recruiting for this, speaks to our culture in a very sad way. Like I feel like they should be playing what they want to be playing, not just what's out there. It's like saying this medicine is bitter, but take it because it's good for you. Like it's the same kind of thing. Yes, it's producing good data, but as an artist, I feel like my sense of the world is somehow violated because that's happening. Like I want to make something else for them. They want to play. Like they would play at home, not as a lab. They would buy off the shelf. Like that's cool. So, random.